potential and the opportunities that artificial intelligence going to bring to corporations, to public sector institutions, and even to artists. But what we haven't discussed yet are potential risk that I implied when we talk about artificial intelligence. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Anastassia Lauterbach with us today. Anastassia, please take a seat. Anastassia, you're a manager, you're an entrepreneur, you sit on boards, and you're really an expert when it comes to cybersecurity. You advise several AI and cybersecurity companies around the world. When we look at AI and cybersecurity, and we look at predominantly the Austrian and German market, how do you perceive the awareness right now? Because we've seen several companies that look at, okay, what are the opportunities? How can we leverage AI? But where is the conversation about potential risk? Where do we stand right now?
So this is quite a comprehensive question, because we need first and foremost to start with digital assets. And the role of digital assets in businesses and in our society. And it's quite interesting, because when I looked at it 2012, the portion of those digital assets in valuation of businesses was in between of 12 to 14, 15%.
Yeah.
And last year it was 90, so 90. And obviously digital asset, we are talking about information, we are talking about systems where this information is based, so IT systems, of course. But those systems currently include edge devices like sensors. We are talking about intellectual property, so everything around information generation, storage of this information, and then information processing. So this is an unbelievable number, 90%. But obviously, this is not like, let's say, I'm seeing this stage, right? Or I'm sitting on this chair and I feel it. I don't necessarily feel this asset class. I can't touch it with my bare hand. But this asset class is something there's a whole industry which is specialized on, and I'm not necessarily currently thinking about cybersecurity. I'm thinking about cybercrime. And if you follow a couple of cybersecurity experts doing blogs on cybercrime, you will learn that this industry is really well organized. So they have their marketplaces. Obviously, you can ruin someone's life if you go on this marketplace and kind of buy tools to destroy reputation, to extract financial information and just defraud someone. That's very easy to get to those dark places on the web. And of course, companies, businesses, they are all out there at the display. Sometimes they are targeted because some particular information is kind of, very interesting for those cyber criminals. Sometimes those cyber criminals act on behalf of rogue states like Iran. Sometimes your company, even if you are a mid-sized business, might become a collateral in a larger attack. And I've been involved in corporate governance affairs for quite some time. Every single company I was involved in had a cyber breach.
Okay.
And I mean, I've been on boards in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, in the Netherlands, every single company. And sometimes we did not even discover that something like that happened on our own. In the case of EasyJet PLC, Google called us and said, look, there's some funky stuff going on with your servers, so what is going on? In the case of Dun & Bradstreet, we were informed by the government, yeah? And then obviously, then we investigated, and it was very interesting. And in both cases, EasyJet and Dun & Bradstreet, actually the source came from a very well-known auditor. So it was not some murky startup, nothing against startup companies, but it was a very well-known, reputable auditor, one of Big Four, and they brought it in, obviously without knowing that that was happening. So this is kind of, the side, another side of us moving into digital space, creating businesses around it, or creating an extension of our, let's say, analog business, right, with data and data-related services, talking to customers, talking to the supply chain with digital channels, et cetera, doing payments, right? So I believe that as long as this awareness that an asset is not just a piece of furniture or, let's say, building, but it's information, it's intellectual property, it's about IT systems. As long as this awareness is not deeply anchored in the heads of the executives, we will not see a better world. And I mean, I spent a lot of time in the United States. What was very characteristic there, it's not like Americans are much better than Austrians or Germans, but in the United States, in 2014, there were a couple of very prominent attacks, and one of those was on Target.
On Target, the supermarket chain, yeah.
Yeah, which is quite a large supermarket, right? So what happened there, so the intrusion came actually from the ventilation system in one of the supermarkets. And through this intrusion, there was an exfiltration of data of credit cards. And obviously, top management of Target was not discussing that something like that was even on the horizon. But the CEO had to go, and a couple of board members, so board of directors, they had to leave the company as a result of this attack. And obviously, when something like this happened and there is some litigation involved, then there's a legal discovery. And it was found that the board of directors has more or less never addressed cybersecurity. There was not a sufficient record in board minutes emphasizing that they were aware, that were taking care and doing whatsoever. And that's kind of, really remarkable. And since this incident, and there was another issue around Yahoo. And when Verizon was buying Yahoo, and then very prominent discovery that Yahoo accounts and personal information of Yahoo customers was implicated, then Yahoo stock lost around 2.7 billion US dollars as a consequence. And of course, the shareholders were not quite delighted with this development. So there was all kind of hearings around this, and Marissa Mayer, she's really a product person, but she has never kind of, design products with security in mind. It was really not on her plate. She was warned by the security team that the situation at Yahoo was not great. But Marissa, she was really pushing into bring me new clients. I would like to completely redesign how we push products to the market, faster releases, better user experience, but no security in mind. And actually, so this emphasis on no security but everything for the customer, it more or less backfired, and it resulted in a drop in valuation of the stock, right, during the due diligence process. So this is a serious matter, and since then, obviously there were more and more prominent attacks and blah, 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 but for my knowledge, more or less every single board director of a large company in the United States receives a cybersecurity training.
Okay.
And it's not just, so if you receive an email like this and that's, don't click, yeah? But it's about governance of the cybersecurity risk. what type of questions do you ask? If you sit on a board and then you need somehow to wrap your mind around the cybersecurity, and you are not a technologist, so we can't expect that general executives out of sudden start to code or, you know, do semiconductors or whatever. So we can't expect that. But we absolutely have to insist that they exercise the fiduciary responsibility and that they ask questions, right? And then, of course, obviously, being a CISO nowadays, it's an absolute nightmare. So the burnout of CISOs is unbelievable.
CISOs are cybersecurity
officers,
yeah.
right? So they are working really non-stop, which brings me to the thinking that, and this is an AI question as well, so as much as we can automate, for example, in doing triage, the better those CISOs will be off. And so there are tons of tools and techniques on how to make their life better. Having said that, with every digital tool you introduce, you obviously open up to other vulnerabilities, and just being very conscious who are you working with. For example, those suppliers of yours, do they understand this? Are they vulnerable themselves? How do I know they might be vulnerable? And just really auditing digital assets and auditing the digital risk, which is not, by the way, the same thing as a threat, and it's not the same thing as a vulnerability.
Yeah.
But this thinking in terms of risk management, and then obviously, of course, there's no 100% security, right? So if Chinese government wants to breach you, they will find, you know, a loophole.
And you mentioned Target and Yahoo as an example from the US. Do you also have some examples maybe from small and medium-sized companies out of Europe?
Yeah.
And what was the crime committed? Was it, you know, ransom? Was it stolen identities?
Yeah.
How can I imagine those crimes?
Yeah, so obviously a ransom, that's demanded ransom, and then ransomware, this is something which is probably more or less in the daily news, right? And with ransom, so you are impacted by malevolent software, and then you can't actually touch your systems. And I remember very, very well the case of Merck, which is a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
And they were impacted, and actually I know very well the person who was running Switzerland back then. And he was running Switzerland on WhatsApp and SMS for 5 weeks.
Because everything else was blocked.
Because he could not access the systems.
Okay.
And we are talking a large, prominent company, and I guess they are not stupid there, right? So, but his legal officer said you can't really do this because obviously, you know, WhatsApp and SMS, and she would have written him a reminder not to do it, but she could not access your system, right? So kind of, you know, tragedy and at the same time great love, but they learned a lot since then, and it was so bad that he even had to order medication from Chile to supply critical medication to the Swiss hospitals because, you know, he did not have another choice. And this medication was brought by a commercial, you know, aircraft.
Okay.
So the costs and the pain, frankly, I don't have the full figure on what happened at Merck.
Yeah.
But this is something which is kind of typical on how it can go wrong. A couple of weeks ago, I read in a German newspaper about a case in Koblenz, and that was really a mid-sized company, so small company, and they were manufacturing luxury bikes. So something, probably they have clients in Switzerland and in Austria. So one bike costs like 7K, 8K, right? And they were impacted by ransom, and they more or less closed everything because they could not actually work around. And this is a very critical question in risk management. Can you restore?
Yeah.
So if you sit on a board of any company, then you have to ask this question, what do you think, can we restore? And of course, you don't need to deep dive in all the procedures, but you need to raise the awareness. And it's not just cover your behind if there's a legal discovery and there's no note, but it's just prudent exercising of fiduciary duty and being responsible for the assets of the company vis-a-vis of shareholders and stakeholders. I had a very funny case. So I mentor a lot of CEOs, and one of my CEOs is a family-owned business. I mean, they are like 160 years old, and they manufacture machines for textile industry. So they do the cotton processing prior it goes to become something else. And he called me once and he said, it's kind of interesting, he received an insane invoice for electricity.
Okay.
And the issue was that he implemented remote maintenance for the machines. So he did not need to send out humans to kind of, have a look whether everything was fine-tuned, etc. So some crooks mined Bitcoin on top of his network because they broke into this sensor network, and he did not isolate it properly. And I mean, there are ways how you architect your systems in your company. So, I've never seen something like that before. But here it is in front of us, and I don't think he's the only one example. So there are other cases. So one prominent insurance company in Israel, who I've been working with, they got ransomed. And what happened there, they decided not to pay. So obviously it's very painful to pay criminals. And their stock plummeted from, I think, $87 to 0.004 cents.
Okay.
Because those criminals started releasing information about customers of this company, and they had motor insurance. And they had private personal data of a prime minister and very prominent Israelis. So, tons of litigation, tons of, outcry in the market, the reputation in the basement, and this company was acquired for pennies by a competitor as a consequence of a cyber attack. So obviously those attacks, they are more or less on a daily basis, right? So the largest cybersecurity fine, which the world knew, was probably vis-a-vis Facebook about privacy, right? And so, there were tons of layers. It was not just something to extract information from the accounts, but it was practices within Facebook and not recognition that certain users were not users, but actually trolls and, fake accounts. But so we were talking about $5 billion US. And obviously what is happening now, we have a huge movement in regulatory velocity, and the amount of regulations around cyber goes up. So I assume that 5 years from now, the amount of current regulation will probably double. And then you have all kind of varieties. So you have geographies, right? And for example, there's not such a thing as a cybersecurity law of the United States. There's not such a thing. But you have regulations in California, in the state of New York, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes certain technologies getting regulated in a separate way, like Internet of Things. Sometimes it's about regulation within a certain business vertical, like healthcare. So healthcare, obviously, personal data, this is something what is, on the surface of any regulated, any country. And if you are a business shipping products outside of Germany or Austria or Switzerland, You might be connected to Singapore, to Hong Kong, to China, to the United States, and all those regulations impact your risk profile. So when I think about risk, I think about three buckets. I'm thinking about the data exfiltration per se, so records might be stolen, some records, some files, right? Then I'm thinking about business interruptions due to the ransomware.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not just the ransom, but all those systems, an average worldwide, we are talking about cost per hour per critical system of $30,000 and then run up this number. And then we are talking about this regulatory exposure, so you will be fined. So in the case of EasyJet, what was very difficult for the board to decide when do we start to inform, because there are thresholds. And obviously you need to get out and hire best lawyers you possibly can to inform you about the regulatory regime, specifically in this or that situation.
Yeah.
And then actually at some point in time pull the trigger and really call the regulator and tell the regulator, here we are. And then you inform not just probably potential, I don't know, 500 victims, but you might inform much more people.
Yeah.
And this might lead to legal actions. It might lead to miscontent, to press, which will back then impact your reputation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not easy. But when you kind of, start asking questions, what about our data exfiltration risk? How many records do we need to run a successful business, right? Go out in Austria, ask around. People will not be capable to tell you, and they should. Then are you aware about your business interruption risk? So what kind of critical systems do you have? What does it mean to have a critical system? For example, if you do a lot of transactions, so a transaction system probably is a very critical system,
Yeah.
right? Or if your machines depend on some sensors connected to a certain network, that then, software running this network might mean it's a very critical system, etc. And then what type of regulatory regimes are you bound to in case your data get exfiltrated, in case you suffer ransomware attack? So what is going to happen? So you need to think, in my eyes, in those three buckets, and be aware about your averages, and then actually manage accordingly. And I'm not saying it will prevent the breach, but I'm saying it kind of, enables some transparency. It enables you to think and to plan, and to question whether, for example, you have some mitigation processes in place.
Yeah.
In case something like this happen. Do you have maybe contacts with the law community or law enforcement community, or do you have, let's say, a conscious decision that you protect your crown jewels in a certain manner, and maybe somewhere you are less protected? So once again, you can't be protected 100%. No one has this type of money. But you can really watch that your crown jewels are in order, and in case something happened, you restore and you are back in business much quicker, right? So, and this is kind of, the downsides of digital creativity, new possibilities, new suppliers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think that's very important, right? Because in the end, in this case, you would, if you're not prepared, you just have to react, and sometimes you have to pay money. You just have to, face the losses, which may even mean lose your business to a competitor, or live with the fact that very sensitive data gets into the market. So you have to be prepared. If we bring in AI in the mix now, what do you see? Are you already, when you speak to the CEOs, are you having conversations about what could potential pitfalls be in the future? What makes us then more vulnerable because we're now implementing AI? Is this already a conversation that you're having with several CEOs?
So I advise one of the largest fund investing in cybersecurity. So they're really terrific because they've never made a bad investment.
Okay.
So every single company they invested into, so cyber company, got a wonderful exit, and I mean, it's really, they're really specialized. What I see there, if we talk about incident management, a lot of things in the technology stack is AI-based. So we see how AI helps those experts, those specialists in cyber to make their technology better. And this is one side. But of course, and you had this wonderful session prior hours, creativity, right? So adversarial general networks, so GANs. It's not just about the next iteration of the actor face to make him look older or younger in a movie. But it might be about creation of fake people, fake identities, and this alone might pose a considerable risk for your business.
The deep fakes, yeah.
Exactly,
yeah.
So the deep fakes, it's a concern, and everything which goes into this direction. I mentor someone who had to go to Korea, and there was this AI conference in Korea. And I mean, for example, Meta, it's not really my space, so I'm very much at home in AI and, you know, in cyber. But there was this Meta conference, and so we went there, and there was this AI professor claiming he found the business model for Meta. And I was like, okay, fantastic, because I mean, I would love to know what it is. And he said, look, so you create this avatar who befriends you in the meta space, and will spend weeks talking about you and about himself or herself. And then once trust is there, he might occasionally drop that there is a nice BMW car or a nice Rolex watch or whatever. And actually, I was kind of thinking, are you kidding me? So it's like, you know, those ads, you know, and they get replaced by something like that. And of course, I mean, that was, I think, a very naive, you know, observation on how this piece of the industry might evolve. But then I was thinking, obviously, there might be some cases about extraditing money or defrauding victims. And I am very, very critical vis-a-vis European legislation on AI, because I think that this legislation does not encourage innovation. It doesn't boost local startups to dare and to try. And without daring and trying, you can't achieve anything, right? So, and of course, most of them will fail, right? But what I like about this legislation, artificial people or avatars, they are banned. So you need to disclose that you are a machine. In the majority of countries, to my knowledge, there's no distinction. So you will not know whether this avatar befriending you is a machine or is a real person. And I think it's an issue. Right, and I mean, I had much fun a day yesterday because I was talking about generative AI in creative industries and, you know, music and arts. So today we are of course talking about cyber. So we need to address this risk of deepfakes and avatars and their impact on our lives from the cyber risk management perspective. And how do you create those, and how do you incorporate those in your entire life, right? So it might be a fine question, like this avatar, but they might be things which might impact children, education. So the whole educational system needs a revamp in all markets, right? So how do you deal with those? and how do you watermark. I mean, of course, you can watermark nowadays, but certain things are not sustainable.
Yeah.
And then the whole question about provenance. Yeah, this who is the original creator, and how to attribute the creation to whatsoever. And I mean, I am known in the industry as someone who is completely in love with decentralized data markets and decentralized ledgers. And obviously, I'm thinking blockchain, but we require a lot of innovation to actually create fun to use, nice systems, which could be used not just by some wizards, but by muggles as well. But I think that this question of provenance and how you can resolve it with decentralized technologies, this is something what might be one of the solutions. And then designing products and services with security in mind and privacy in mind. And then obviously implementing a rigorous cybersecurity management in companies. And then finally, so if you are in the top management of such a company, I would never ever let a CISO report into the CIO.
Okay.
I think you should completely decouple those two, because the motivation is very different. So the CIO in a company, he's motivated to implement things and be budget conscious and release quick and actually do some additions to maybe existing products and services with the means of digital. But CISO needs to think risk. And this risk might not necessarily comply with the budget envelope of the CIO. And the CISO needs to be the best buddy with the CFO and the risk manager. For companies which are small, you require probably a good network of people with understanding, automated discovery of your crown jewels, and automated underwriting so you can get cybersecurity insurance. And last but not least, I truly believe that we need reorganization of the whole cybersecurity market in terms of the insurance. So risk can be outsourced.
Yeah.
But what is currently going on, if you see larger companies, Allianz, Global Allianz, industrial branch, they accept 1 out of 4. And it's not because they say, oh, those other 3 are a bad risk, but they just can't digest the amount, the volume. So it's an oversaturation in terms of demand. So you need something which is automated underwriting and risk assessment. And you need pockets of knowledge, maybe in industrial associations, in, I don't know, something like a Wirtschaftskammer, whatever, so that the smaller guys can learn and can somehow jump on certain tools and get benefit from them.
Shared knowledge as well, yeah.
Yes, yes, and obviously, you know, if you do stuff like this, I mean, it's obviously very positive for the local industries, for local companies, but there should be more in that, and increasing cybersecurity and technology literacy in normal people managing businesses. This is paramount. Without this awareness, we will still be kind of naked in front of the cyber criminal community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before I go ahead with my questions, I just wanted to see if there's any question or comment from the audience on what you've discussed so far. Yeah. Karin. Karina.
So I was wondering if I was a CEO of a company, do you have resources or how to get started, or is there a course that you would recommend?
Thank you.
So I can recommend, so obviously there are tons of books, right? And so I have my favorite, yeah? I can actually tell you which is that, right? There's a wonderful book by Ariel Evans on cybersecurity resilience and cybersecurity enterprise risk. And so there are courses in universities teaching this. I really love courses which very holistically approach the risk and talking about digital assets rather than vulnerabilities and threats. I mean, a threat is a threat. So obviously we have a war in Europe, in the Ukraine, and there might be threats coming out of the consequences of this war, right? Yeah. You might have unpatched systems, so you are vulnerable. But those two are not necessarily what your risk is. Your risk is much more, so those are contributing factors to maybe your specific risk. And I would love to have an understanding what my risk is and be open that I will learn more and more and more. Like my CEO, who had actually really no clue, he might have been approached by, you know, some AI companies and saying, look, you saved so much money because you did this remote maintenance of the machines. And then he got hit by this attack, you know, Bitcoin mining, right? So, but you learn. And I think, and this is an interesting aspect, usually in industries, you try to get a certain knowledge, and this is then your competitive advantage. But I don't have data on this, but this is just my gut feeling that there's something interesting going on around cyber. So companies share. And they share to the extent this was the lawyer who gave us the best advice in XYZ. And for example, I learned this in aviation industry because I was on the board of EasyJet PLC. Security around airports and aircrafts is paramount. So there are commissions built by people from the industry, and they really discuss safety and security measures. Like, for example, there's a new gate at the airport, and if you navigate your aircraft on the ground, you need to watch this and that angle so that you park in a safe way. So they really share this information because security is paramount.
Yeah.
And what I observed, they start sharing information. So in the UK, I do not know really about you know, Germany or Austria because simply aviation is not my primary industry. But they started sharing the information on cyber attacks. And sometimes, by the way, they learned through this sharing that it was not just one attack against them, but the whole industry was attacked. Like we learned at EasyJet, apparently that was coming from China, and apparently they were looking for certain IP, but then certain movements of certain passengers around Europe.
Oh.
Yeah. And then, of course, I mean, what do you do with this information? Obviously, you provide it to the government, and then they do what they need to do with that, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that, of course, you know, so in the US, the board members had to get trained in cybersecurity. You also advise, you know, corporations here to look into it. What about employees, you know, like those on the ground? Because quite often, you know, they might pose a vulnerability as well. Have you seen some good case examples from your work where there was a company who really happened to upskill their employees in that field, and what did they do?
So what I can give you is some insight. This educational tech as a piece, as an area in cybersecurity investments, it grows. Mm-hmm. So usually, if you look into educational tech, you're like, oh, boring, this is not the area to invest. But I know for a fact that some good funds are going through the providers, trying to pick those who are the most comprehensive, interesting, obviously enjoyable to use, in the way that it's kind of okay, because I guess the subject is probably not the most favorite.
Can be a bit dry.
I mean, exactly so. But I know that all big corporate, they implement trainings, and then they give you a certificate, and it should be repeated on a yearly basis. And the training is linked, of course, to policies. How do you touch the information? And I love asking a question: do you have a data governance framework in your company, right? So who is using data? Obviously, with AI and democratization of AI, more and more people will get into the taste to use data, thank God. But how do you touch it? And can someone maybe be a gatekeeper for certain things? What do you need? And of course, learning maybe from the organizations which are data native. And I'm not saying that they are perfect. I mean, tech industry, big tech companies, they are not young companies any longer. So they are 20 years plus old, right? But because actually in those organizations, more or less everyone is empowered to work with data, build products and services with data, monitor data, make market decisions with data. So at Facebook, you don't need to go to controller to see the segment of your market you're working in. So you're just plug into the system and you see your numbers, and then you can make a decision, what do you do with that, right? Not the same thing with German companies or Austrian companies. But just learn about their practices and try really to build a network of people who might know something more than you do. And I'm not saying it's very standardized and it's easy, but I mean, it's just really communicating to people with more knowledge.
And I guess also understanding that with new technology come new forms of crimes,
absolutely,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, we can't turn the clock. And it's interesting, actually. To my knowledge, nowadays, 67% of the attacks are coming through the cloud applications. And when I was an exec at Deutsche Telekom Group, so the movement was everyone is going to the cloud. And now I mentor one of the board member of IBM Global. And I'm hearing from her that actually now we have a reverse movement, that many things get backed into premise deployment. And I mean, we probably will deal with hybrid environments. And I'm talking about larger businesses. Of course, if you are a little company, you might have more or less everything in the cloud. And another interesting data point for you, so right now 1/3 of D&O, so D&O, Directors and Officers Liability Insurance claims are on behalf of cyber attacks.
Wow.
So, and that gives you a flavor on what is going on. So I can only encourage you to go to events like this, connect, collect some information about great courses, books, and then just share this information with your neighbors as I think a better hygiene around cyber risk is great for our kids, our siblings. It's just a matter for everyone.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Anastassia, for being with us today and for this really eye-opening conversation. I think this is a topic, it's always great to look at the bright side, the new opportunities, but I think we also have to have this mature thinking of really looking at the risks as well, and your presentation really elaborated that, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And in 13 minutes, we are revealing the winners of the SALS 21 AI Hackathon. So 13 minutes to go.